Okay, I'd like to talk about the left and the police. I'm not going to talk about like the police solving rape cases or serial killers or stuff like that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the police as the enforcers of the will of the state, or in fact part of the state themselves, and what the left think. As you remember, during the miners' strike and during other industrial disputes in particular, the left always used to describe the police as Maggie's boot boys, which is in fact what they were, but very well paid boot boys. Your average boot boy doesn't get a nice fat salary for being a boot boy. They usually get a couple of years in prison. But anyway, Maggie's boot boys, and the left are always vociferously anti-police. They're against, for example, police brutality, the injustice, people getting fitted up, the police corruption, the police racism and so on, which does exist, as we all know, and is endemic and is part of the whole policing system. But that's because it's part of the system. But you never heard when Labour was in power. Remember, Labour are, by some definition, supposed to be left, aren't they? You never heard the police described as Blair's boot boys or anything like that. And when the Labour Party were in power and attacking people on picket lines, such as at Grunwicks and so forth, and had thousands of police out there protecting the National Front when they were marching in the 1970s, you didn't hear them, the police were criticised for that. But really, they were acting under the orders of the Labour government, which was supposed to be left-wing, or whatever you want to call it. It certainly wasn't conservative, was it? It certainly wasn't Liberal Democrat. It was supposed to be socialist and left-wing. So what I'm saying, in fact, is that the police and the government, whether they're right-wing, centre or left-wing, are always tied up, and they will always defend the interests of the government. Now, of course, let's have a look at the extreme left, which is really my target. What do the extreme left think about the police? Well, we've already had Ken Livingstone, who is regarded as extreme left by some people. When he was the mayor of London, he was the one that was personally responsible for the policing of the May Day demonstrations, where thousands of people were killed, where literally thousands of police swamped the streets of London to stop a few thousand anarchists and other sympathisers demonstrating militantly on May Day. And on the May Day demonstrations, there was a bit of violence, but not really all that much. It wasn't cars set on fire or mass looting or anything like that. I think the old McDonald's got smashed up. But the response of the police was completely disproportionate, and it was all orchestrated by our old friend Ken Livingstone. So as far as I'm concerned, people like Ken Livingstone and Tony Blair are just the same as Margaret Thatcher, Winston Churchill and all the rest of them. They're all pigs and they're all the enemy. Whether they call themselves socialist or Labour makes absolutely no difference. They all love the police, they strengthen the police, they support the police, and they rarely criticise the police. So much for that. But what about the extreme left? Say the communists, the socialists, the Leninists, the Trotskyists, the Stalinists. What's their attitude to the police? Well, of course, they're always under heavy pressure by the police, being infiltrated by the police, being brutalised by the police, being beaten up by the police on demonstrations on certain occasions. But in reality, what do they really think about the police? When I was very young and naive and beginning to involve myself in politics when I was about 16, about 100 years ago it seems like, the anarchists in Britain, we weren't very strong, so I used to spend a lot of time talking with communists and people from Trotskyite parties and so forth to educate myself politically. And I'll tell you one thing, and it's completely true, and they still believe it, even though they sublimate it. They actually used to call the police the workers in blue. The workers in blue. Not the enemy, not the stormtroopers, although they probably were, but in reality, the workers in blue. That's what they used to call them. And that's what they still call them. Obviously, secretly, amongst the Central Committee, amongst themselves. Because, I mean, if you're a member of the Socialist Workers' Party, you don't want to hear the police described as workers in blue, particularly since they're more likely to have beaten you up, arrested you, killed you, or fitted you up. But the leadership do believe that. And the left, almost every single party of the left, as Stalinists, Trotskyites, they actually think it would be good if the police were unionised. So really, the police are nothing more than the darlings of the left. Because when the left ever take power, what is the first thing they do is to set up a police state. Have a look at Russia, the revolution made by the masses and then usurped by the Bolshevik Party. And what was one of the first acts of the Bolshevik Party? To set up the Cheka, the secret police, to hunt out counter-revolutionaries. And in the process of hunting out counter-revolutionaries, they destroyed all the other revolutionary groups, including the anarchists. Not 5 or 10 years after the revolution had broken out, but almost immediately. And the police state, remember, Hitler's Germany is always regarded as the police state. Quite rightly as well, with the Gestapo, the concentration camps, children denouncing their parents to the police. Quite rightly it could be regarded as a racist police state. But Hitler did not seize power until 1933. For over 10 years, from about the year 1918, there was a police state in Russia where millions of people were deported into gulags, were tortured, worked to death, starved in artificial famines and so forth, where the amount of people killed under communism, under Mao Zedong, and so on, as far more than the victims of Nazism. This, of course, you know, is not some kind of revisionism. It just happens to be a fact. They were in power longer than Hitler, so therefore they had a more opportunity to kill more people, which they did, in the tens of millions. And it was all done with the police. In Vichy, France, the police herded the Jews into concentration camps, stadiums, then they put them on trains, in cattle trucks, and sent them to their extermination. In Russia, exactly the same thing happened. People were put onto cattle trucks, deported for thousands of miles into Siberia, where most of them died of overwork, starvation and brutality. The police state. And that's what the left are all about. They're not our friends, they are our enemies. They believe in the police. They are the police. They have a police mentality. Even look back at September the 7th this year. Unite Against Fascism, the Socialist Workers' Party Fund. They were talking with the police and collaborating with the police months before the EDL had their march. And they fingered us, right, as provocateurs and so forth. They fingered us and fitted us up with the police. They knew what the police were going to do. They didn't bother to tell us. As far as I'm concerned, they are as guilty as the police that killed us. They are the enemy. All the left are the enemy. They cannot be trusted. There are some smaller breakaway Trotskyite kind of groups that are moving and kind of maybe going towards anarchism, because of they believe in different methods of organisation, that the party is not supreme, that organisation should be more horizontal and so on. But quite honestly, I don't trust them either. I don't trust them at all. And unless they shake off this love of the police, this love of authority, they'll never be anarchists and they'll never be revolutionaries. So basically, what I have to say to people is the left may bleat on about justice and injustice and so on, but they don't believe what they're saying, because if they were ever to have power, they would behave just the same as the police do now, and probably a hell of a lot worse. And their record speaks to them. In Russia, in China, everywhere where they had power, there's nothing more than total and absolute tyranny and a police state. So the left, along with Liberal Democrats and the right and the fascists, they've all got one thing in common. They've all got that authoritarian mentality where they love the police. And all this bollocks about workers in blue and so on, which, as I said, is kept hidden from the party members, shows their mentality of unionise the police and so on. We don't want to unionise the police. We don't regard them as workers in blue. We regard them as the enemy. They know that we regard them as the enemy, and that's good. And that's it. So if you want to be an anarchist, you want to be a revolutionary, have no truck with the police whatsoever, particularly when it comes to them enforcing social order and protecting the government and so on and so forth. So my final message, that's another thing as well, of course, whenever we do fight against the police, we're regarded as hooligans or even agent provocateurs. So I say this. The only agenda that the left have is to re-elect a Labour government with the same police, the same bureaucrats, the same aristocrats, the same lords and millionaires and billionaires in charge. That's their agenda, and it's all with a sort of invisible love affair with the police. So that's all I have to say about the left and the police. They are basically the same thing.